Okay, so myself and Hywell are both work in Public Health England as data analysts, predominantly working on the NCMP. So we're just sort of going to take you through a few of the resources that are available on our website, some that you might be familiar with, some not. And also I'm going to demonstrate a new online data tool for the NCMP, which displays your data at local authority level. And then Hal's going to take us through sort of reasons for sort of feeding back to schools and looking at that and starting that discussion. And also talking about what sort of resources we can provide you to help you feedback and work with schools. So this is our current website. It's where you can access our sort of analysis reports and guidance on the NCMP. Also available on there is the sort of ward level data and MSOA level data on prevalence of obesity, which I think would be really useful. And we kind of feel that we do this sort of once, so you guys don't have to sort of repeat this analysis locally. So we will be updating that with the new data early next year, and that will be available through our website. We're also going to update our guidance as well. You might have seen our guidance for analysis documents that we've sort of produced annually. And we're looking to sort of reproduce that and help sort of translate the new regulations that are in place and help you understand how you can share data and how you can use the data locally. So also, every year we produce a detailed analysis report at the national data to look at the patterns and trends in child obesity that we're seeing through the fantastic data we get from the NCMP. And you can see previously Anne sort of took us through looking at the inequalities in child obesity by area level deprivation, and we can see sort of issues there with increasing inequalities. So that's included in the report, and that's something we will continue to update and examine. I'm going to pass you to Hal just to have a look at some of the other bits of information within our report.
We thought we'd just sort of flag a few of the things that are in the trends report that we do on an annual basis. And really it's just to sort of show like the value of like having so many sort of child records in the NCMP data set, and like how we can really sort of dig into the data and like look at patterns and trends over time in a level of detail that we can't with any other data set on child obesity. What these charts show is we're looking at the sort of changes across the distribution in BMI. So on the left-hand side of this chart, you've got the children with the sort of lowest BMI in reception, and on the right-hand side, the children with the highest BMI. And the pattern we're seeing in reception is what we might consider to be probably like a sort of healthy pattern of change in a way. As Anne showed, like the trend in reception, it looks like for boys, it might actually, prevalence might be decreasing, and for girls, it's probably sort of level, it's at least leveling off. Doesn't look like it's going up. And if we dig into this across the distribution, what we can see is on the left, the children with the lightest BMI, their BMI appears to be increasing, which is a good thing because they're the ones who are like most underweight or, you know, at risk from having a low BMI. And at the top end, the children with the sort of highest BMI, it looks like there's definitely for boys, it looks like there's some significant decreases in BMI at the top end. And for girls, at least it's not going up at that end. So we're seeing like kind of quite positive changes, at least for boys, I think, in reception. But when we look at year 6, we see a slightly different pattern. And this again ties in with something Anne was saying about how we're perhaps seeing like a population shift in BMI, which is why maybe like heavier BMIs are being sort of normalized. Because really, it's not just that the sort of fattest children are getting fatter. What we can see in year 6 is across the whole BMI distribution, BMI is increasing. And I should have explained actually, what these charts show is like, it's kind of like the average annual change across all years of the NCMP. So we're sort of, when we saw those previous charts with like lots of bars, it's like the gradient across those bars or the average increase across the bars. So what we're seeing here is really like even the children with the lowest BMI is going up, which is probably a good thing, but the children with the highest BMI is going up at a similar rate. So really, in year 6, it shows that you know, really we've got a problem across the board. It's not really something that we can just tackle the most obese children, because the ones who are nearly obese are probably going to end up obese if we keep doing that. Another thing, just quickly to sort of show you, is we can actually look at the NCMP at patterns by ethnic group. Something we can't really do with, say, HSE data, where the just numbers aren't big enough to really sort of drill down into it. And what we can see is that we can see prevalence for the white British boys. We can see that's decreasing on the dot on the far left. For white British girls, actually white girls, we've joined together white British and white other groups here. Girls in the white groups in reception are like no change, but for boys and girls in the white ethnic groups, we can see a significant increase over time. Again, we can see a significant increase for Asian boys and girls in year 6, no change in reception. We can't pick out any significant changes in the black ethnic groups at the moment, but that doesn't mean it's not going up, and the suggestion would be probably that for girls in reception and both boys and girls in year 6, there is quite likely to be an increase. And the other thing to stress here is that these are the ethnic groups often who have the highest prevalence in the black ethnic group. So whilst it may not be going up, it doesn't mean it's not a problem, and they still should be like a high priority group. We will obviously be updating these again, probably early next year. The next update on this will come out. And the more years of data we've got, the more we're able to sort of drill into these patterns. And yeah, so if you keep an eye out for that, then it should be out quite soon. I'll pass you back to Caroline.
In previous years, we've produced an Excel-based analysis tool at local authority level, and hopefully some of you have used that and found that useful. What we have done, we've actually now produced an online version which has similar information in there. The reason for it, we thought an online tool would be much easier to use, more accessible for people, sort of outside local authority and NHS as well can use. And it's also, we had an issue with sort of areas having sort of older versions of Excel, so some functionality didn't work, so all sorts of problems, which fortunately this new tool kind of resolves for us. And I think some of you might recognise it because it's used to display the Public Health Outcomes Framework data, which is on the website below here. So we're going to launch this tool in early December and then update it in early January with the new 2012-13 data. So that's what it looks like. This is the test version. What we're hoping to do is add functionality to the tool as it develops. So it's a general sort of Public Health England data presentation tool, and there's a team in the East region who are sort of developing this, and a lot of sort of hard work's gone into it. But they're going to add to it all the time, so we're sort of really happy to receive your feedback on what you'd like to see in the tool, sort of maybe from the data side, but also from the functionality side. And so at the moment, what's not in there is local authority level prevalence broken down by deprivation quintile or ethnic group, but that's something that we are hoping to add very soon, possibly early next year. So what we can see here, we've added all of the NCMP data in. So just along this chart here, we've got all of the London boroughs, and the indicators available in this tool are pretty much what you'd expect from the NCMP. So prevalence of underweight, healthy weight, overweight and obesity prevalence for both reception and year 6 children. So this page of the sheet, and what I'll do is we'll go through so you can see just here. That's shaded on the teal colour, so we'll just move across and have a look at each of the pages in this tool. So this one compares for all of the indicators for each of the local authorities that we've selected for this region, sort of your figures compared to England. And you can change that and compare the figures to the region as well if you'd like, and that's what then changes the shadings. So we can see where the cells are shaded red, the prevalence is worse than England, where they're shaded green, it's what's deemed as a prevalence that's better. So for underweight, a better prevalence would be low, as well as for obesity, and for a better prevalence for healthy weight would be a higher figure. So the map functionality was added sort of in the last sort of 6 months, I think, to this tool, which is really great. Because previously we did display the data in our e-atlases, our online e-atlases, but we found that they weren't sort of easy to use, not as user-friendly as this tool. So fortunately, this tool enables us to look at it mapped geographically. And what I've done here is sort of select a couple of the boroughs in London. So you could select your own by clicking your area on the map, and you can see that then your area appears on the table, so you can compare yourself perhaps to your neighbours, but also perhaps to other statistical neighbours elsewhere in the country if you want to view your data and other local authorities' data. So here we can flick through, we're sort of showing here reception prevalence of excess weight, but you can flick through all of the indicators I mentioned and look at that. And what sort of might be quite useful for this, whereas before in our Excel tool, you're able to sort of take the charts and use them in your reports. You can do the same for this, and you can possibly sort of take screen grabs and include them perhaps in your sort of DPH report or any other report or presentation. So hopefully you'll find that quite useful. This is my favourite of the areas of this profile, because previously we haven't really been able to sort of show trend over time with the NCMP. And we didn't include that in our e-atlas, but I'm really pleased that we are able to do that and provide sort of a simple tool for you to be able to sort of yourselves and your colleagues to track the prevalence of, in this case, overweight and obesity over time. And so what this does, you can see that sort of the circles are shaded red, and in this case red and amber, or also green. So that helps you sort of understand where your prevalence sort of sits compared to the benchmark. And so again, we'll be adding the 12-13 data on here shortly. So this section then just sort of does similar things. You can flick through all of the different indicators. So here again, we're looking at reception year prevalence of obesity for local authorities in the southeast. So again, we can flick through different areas, different regions, but this then shows us sort of where your local authority sits compared to the other ones in your region. And you might be familiar with this data presentation from Health Profiles, so it's like a spine chart. So again, just shows for your particular local authority, so you can find yours from a drop-down menu or flick through and look at various ones, so where your data are placed for all of the indicators. And as well, you can see the next tab along is called Definitions. I haven't done a screenshot of that because it's not as pretty as these other ones, but there you can just go and get the sort of metadata and definitions for all the indicators and further information. And you can also download the data to use yourself as well. So as well as prevalence data, we've decided to include sort of data quality indicators because it's sort of really important for you guys to be able to sort of track and see where you stand so in terms of participation rates and the collection of ethnicity coding and child postcode in your data set. And so again, you can do the same things as we saw previously, the prevalence data. We can map it here. So what I've done, which you can actually do for the prevalence area, instead of looking at the sort of red, amber, green shading, we've looked at this by quintiles. So you can do that for the prevalence as well. And then I think it's just a really good sort of tool to be able to track, again, with the trends in data quality. We can see here Camden Borough has always had a fantastic collection of ethnicity coding in the NCMP, with near 100% or pretty much 100% every year. So it'd be interesting sort of to continue to add this and perhaps identify some areas where maybe some improvements could be made. Okay, I'm going to pass you back to Hywell, who's going to take you through the school feedback section.
Yeah, we were asked at these workshops to do a bit of a talk about school feedback, and from previously attending these, like we've been coming along to these for the last couple of years, we get a lot of questions about this, and during the year we get a lot of questions about it. So we thought we'd try and maybe start a bit of discussion, which with you by sort of showing you a few slides. And on the tables, there's there's a little questionnaire about sort of school feedback, with a few questions on there. So if you have got any ideas or want to share anything with us about what you think's good, please sort of scribble away on those and hand them in. Or there's an email address on there as well. You can get back to us. Now, clearly, there's a lot of benefit to feeding back to schools, just in terms of engaging schools kind of with the programme. If we don't give anything to schools, head teachers especially seem to feel, why are we taking part in this? We kind of help you come into schools, give you registers, and we get absolutely nothing back out of it. So what's the point of it? And we want to keep schools engaged. We want to keep them happy, basically. So it's important to kind of try and do as much as we can with that. There are some reasons why we've been cautious with kind of giving feedback to schools around things like disclosing individual children's information, sort of parents being concerned that this information is meant to just be used by health services, so why is it being given to schools? And our main concern as analysts is often really just whether these data are reliable at school level, and that's something we're going to kind of go over here in a bit. One thing I want to sort of make clear is that there's no right answer with this, and this is why people ask us, what should we do with school feedback? And it's well, we really don't know, because we get at these workshops, I've had people come up to me and say things like, the head teachers want their prevalence data, and if we don't give it them on a year-by-year basis, they're not going to take part in the scheme. So we're like, well, maybe you should consider giving it them. And then in other areas, they're saying, the head teachers are saying if we don't, well, which did I just say, with the other way around, I forgot which I just said. Head teachers saying if you don't give this information out, we won't take part, and others are saying if you do give it out, we won't take part. So it's like, well, which is the right answer? And we've had examples from areas where they've had successful school feedback which really differ with what they've given. So there isn't a right answer, and it's very much probably finding what works in your area. But what we wanted to stress here is really the reasons why we sort of tend to not think it's a good thing to give individual year school feedback. Because if anyone's used our school feedback tool, you'll probably find that for the vast majority of your schools, it says there's no significant difference. And people do sort of seem to think, well, that makes it a bit of a useless tool. But hopefully what I'll show you now sort of explains why that is the case. As any of you who work in sort of public health will be probably familiar with, we tend to put confidence limits around a lot of things. The NCMP is like, due to them taking about 1 million measurements at national level, the confidence limits around our national estimate on the left-hand side are so small you won't be able to see them unless you stood about where I am. Even at, say, a local authority, our estimates are about plus or minus 2% around, these are sort of hypothetical year 6 estimates of like 18% of children being obese. So in a typical local authority, you can guess that it's about between 16 and 20 with reasonable confidence. Problem is, if we go down to a school level, you're looking at about plus or minus 13%. So around a typical year 6 figure, you're saying, well, it's, you know, somewhere between sort of 5% and sort of 31%. So it's not really telling you a great deal. And the reason for this is that the average school has only 31 children measured in a single year. That's per age group. So 31 children in reception, 31 in year 6 on average. You know, we do have some schools with, you know, a couple of hundred children measured, but they're pretty rare. And, you know, about 50% of schools have less than 30 children measured per year. And now, given that those children are changing from year to year, then, you know, how robust is that measurement going to be? Well, the answer is, like, not very robust in most cases. What we did here, we just picked an average school with 31 children being measured. On the left, you've got reception, on the right, year 6. And we'd have a look at what the sort of typical variation at school level is. And for the school on the left in reception, the first couple of years of NCMP measurements, it looked like there was about 18% of kids obese, which in reception looks to be quite high. The third year, 10%, about on the average. Fourth year, 29%, really high. But the next year, 3%, oh, really low. So people sort of, if you wanted to use this information, for example, to say target interventions at a specific school, what you're going to do, you're going to run into this school really quick in 2009-10 and then run off somewhere else in 10-11 when it looks like you've done something amazing because prevalence has dropped to 3%. So really, this isn't going to provide robust information for, say, targeting. It's not like a robust indicator of prevalence on a single year. In a large school, you know, probably a little bit better, but even in this is a school with about 167 children measured a year in reception, and it's still varying from 11 to 3% to 6%. And in year 6, nearly 200 children measured and going from like 19% to 10%. So we can see the figures aren't jumping around quite as much, but still, whether they're really telling us anything that useful on a single year basis. Another chart, just to try and sort of like push this home, if it's not obvious already, that we don't think single-year figures are that robust. We looked at a local authority. This is Milton Keynes, it happens to be, but it could have been any. And we looked at, like, in 2009-10 on the left-hand side, like, we picked the 5 schools with the highest prevalence and the 5 schools with the lowest prevalence, just to see, well, what happens over a couple of years. So you can see the purple lines at the top. There is one school which was the highest in the first year, and it's amongst the highest in the next year. What might not be so clear at the back is these sort of grey lines in the middle, which are all the other schools that weren't the top 5 or the bottom 5. But in general, the schools that had highest prevalence or the lowest prevalence in 9-10 ended up sort of scattered around pretty much at the end. They're not consistently the highest or the lowest prevalence. So, you know, again, single-year estimates are just not really going to be that robust at the school level. And a final slide, which is showing the challenges we've got with school feedback, is even if we combine 3 years together, these are the schools in a sample local authority with 3 years of data combined, You know, whilst they're shown, they're ranked, and with 3 years we've got between sort of 50 and 400 measurements in a school. If we look at the confidence limits around those estimates, you wouldn't really want to sort of put much money on the school at the bottom actually staying the high, you know, really truly having the highest prevalence. It's, you know, there's total overlap of the confidence limits all the way through. So this is the difficulty we face, is that we obviously do want to give things back to schools, but it's kind of hard to give them anything robust, and without just sort of saying, well, there's no significant difference from your local area or from the region or even from the national average, then it's kind of hard to know what to say. Our suggestions would be that we really try not to feed back any prevalence figures that are based on less than, say, 100 measurements. That's just really getting too small to mean anything useful. And that may well mean things like combining years of NCMP data. Other options would be, say, combining schools together and feeding back to, say, clusters of schools or groups of schools. We would recommend that really, if actual prevalence figures are given, that there's some like confidence limits around there, but we personally sort of prefer like kind of giving significant difference rather than actual figures to avoid the temptation for sort of league tables to be created and confidence limits to be ignored and things like this. Things like school level participation can be more important at a school level. We've seen at national level that, say, in the early years of the NCMP, there was definitely a link between areas with low participation and lower reported prevalence of obesity. And looking at that more recently, we have seen in some areas where participation has dropped for various reasons. That has often been accompanied with a drop in like prevalence. And now if that can be seen at, or detected at local authority or PCT level, it's going to have an even bigger impact at school level. There are other things which can affect school level results, like sort of changing in sex ratio from year to year, which if you look at school level, there can be sort of swings in schools, or even things like where you have occasionally there are single-sex schools, and you want to consider not comparing that to the national average because a girls' school is likely to be lower and a boys' school likely to be higher, for example. So the sort of thing we have seen is one of the points just to make is that it's perhaps also important to consider what these data actually mean, because schools with a sort of very deprived, in very deprived areas, or with a sort of like ethnic mix of with certain ethnic mixes of children are likely to have higher prevalence. So we want to make clear that indicators of school prevalence are not necessarily one of like performance. It doesn't mean if you've got high prevalence in that school, you're doing badly to tackle child obesity. And if you've got low prevalence, that you're doing really well. Often it'll just represent the sort of demographics of the children who attend that school. So it's kind of important to consider what they sort of mean when feeding back, or to provide some information on that to head teachers. And the sort of thing we've seen that's been we've thought looks quite useful, and the feedback from people who've done it seems to suggest it is perhaps considering things like feeding back a map of prevalence in the local area, say at ward level, which, as Caroline mentioned, you can get from our website, and then plotting schools on there. So head teachers, rather than getting the data for the 31 children who are measured in those in their school, can see what the prevalence is in the surrounding area, which is obviously likely to be the sort of a catchment area for their school, and that will give them some indication. But these are just our suggestions, and definitely don't want to make it sound like we're really against school feedback. We do think it's really important to feed back to schools. But those are the sort of issues we've got to tackle, and we'd be very grateful to hear from, you know, any examples of good practice you've had locally, or any problems you've had locally, and obviously your feelings on the suggestions of the questions on the table, which are up here, but I won't read them out because you've got them on the table. One final slide here is, I think there are examples of this on the table, are there? It's just the sort of thing we thought we might be able to add to the school feedback letter in order to make it seem a bit more sort of valuable to the head teachers who receive it, which was to, as well as giving the typical letter, which is on the left, which is what we've been giving out previously, was to maybe supplement that with some of the sort of national findings, at least, like to show, let's say, to demonstrate that the NCMP data, whilst it might not be telling them much about their school, at least it's been very useful for us to like monitor the trend at national level, pick out differences by ethnic group, to pick out sort of differences by socio-demographic group and things like this. So that was what we thought might be useful. You may feel that's a complete waste of time or have a better idea, and if so, please scribble on the pieces of paper and let us know.
So what I'll do, I'll collect, if you don't mind taking some time just to fill in those questionnaires. There's also a question on there, sort of just to find out sort of what you do. And Hal gave an example of where I spoke to people working in Kingston Local Authority, and it's them doing, who are looking to do the ward map. And I'm sure there's lots of other good work going on across other areas in this region in the southeast as well. So if you could sort of maybe sort of mention what you're doing, leave your email address on there if you'd like. But if you don't mind, just I'll collect them afterwards, or my postal address and email address is on the reverse of the questionnaire if you'd like to sort of send that back to me at a later date. So thank you. We'd really appreciate your feedback.